You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know Maya.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at mayaakai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Nothing like a restart to something. This is episode 15. You think by now I'd have it together, but every now and then there's a hiccup along the way. But thank you for staying the journey with me in the course. Of course, as I always say, Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. I like to feel that this is a forward-thinking podcast. I work in the mental health field, though some people may know me from the sports side. My background really is in mental health. I've been in that industry for 15 years. I have a master's in counseling, working on my PhD, as well as I'm a crisis intervention specialist. So really, when I do these podcasts, it's not because I want to jump on Facebook and just have these random conversations. I have come to find that I am a good source of information, and there is a lack of people having access to resources and good sources of information. So I created this podcast because I really wanted to begin to share what I think is poignant information with people. There you go. You can hear me. That's even better. Thank you, Vernon, for being my technical director for the show. Definitely appreciate it. So with that being said, the show is usually about 45 to 50 minutes, but lately we've been taking it right to the top of the hour, which is okay. If the conversation's worth it, I'm willing to go if people are sharing comments. Speaking of, if you are sharing comments, you put them into the comment section, whether you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, and voila, I click and add them to the show. Remember, you can always listen to former episodes of the show. You can go to mayaakai.com. I'm going to be self-promotion on that. That's my preference for you to listen. But of course, you may have your podcast platform preference. So you can always find me on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio. And now you can find me in Amazon Audibles. Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. And of course, please subscribe to my YouTube page. It's Maya Akai. You can find me there. And by now, most of you probably are getting social with me. You can follow me, obviously, on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai, and Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. All the ways that you can connect with the show. So like I said, get comfortable, find that space. Hopefully you can take this, 45 to 50 minutes with me to dive into this episode's topic, which is the struggle is real. Legitimately, it's real. Let's talk self-esteem. And most of us feel we're unwavering in it. But I want to give you some perspective because I think we're often challenged more in ways that we don't realize. So like I said, if you can, get comfortable. This is midday, so you might still be at work. I totally understand. So hopefully you're listening with a clear mind. If not, remember, work at your own pace with these 15 episodes. I appreciate every time someone tunes in. But honestly, if you're still back in episode 10 because you're processing that, I'm okay with it. This is a work at your pace type of experience we're having together. And recently, at least these last two podcasts for me, have really been based on recent personal experiences that kind of opened my eyes to something. Interesting enough, as a mental health professional, we always talk about self-care. Take care of yourself. It's so important. Even we encourage to stay in therapy ourselves, to have someone that we can lean into, so to speak. Not a fan of it, but the reason I have to do it is because if I expect for someone to be open and vulnerable with me, I have to know what that experience feels like. And that's the thing that makes you so much better at your job when you realize for some people how challenging it can be to be able to seek someone else to talk to. My recent experience that I had really opened my eyes to some things that I thought were pretty solid, only to find out they're not as solid as a rock as I thought. So this is one of those episodes that I think really is poignant and important. So remember, like I said, if you want to join the conversation, share your thoughts, just comment in the comment section of YouTube or Facebook and click, I will share it with all the rest of the listeners of the show. So let's jump into talking about the struggle is real. Let's talk about self-esteem. Most of us legitimately would feel that we have good self-esteem. I would tell you that self-esteem, like many things, can be like the weather. But one thing I think is important to differentiate for you right off the bat, and remember, every episode, if you go to mayaakai.com, you can go to the podcast resource section, and I add supplemental information on you can read up on some of this stuff. I want to distinguish really quickly between self-confidence versus self-esteem. Slight differences, and often people feel they can be very interchangeable. Technically, they're not. Self-confidence is more about how you project yourself to other people. what you want them to see about your ability and your skill sets. Whereas self-esteem is more of that internal mechanism. It's how you see yourself on the inside and pretty much even how you see yourself on the outside world. Not how you project, but more about your more likely than not objective opinion of things. So just know there's a distinct difference between having great self-confidence and unwavering self-esteem. Very different. And most people don't know the differentiate the two because they feel like I'm always up here. But the real question is, how do you really see yourself on the inside? And how do you see yourself as you interact with the outside world? Because this is where self-esteem plays into it. So self-esteem, for what it's worth, and it's worth more than you can ever know, is the cornerstone of how we feel about ourselves and interact with others. It's pretty much predicated on early experiences and continues how you engage throughout your social and cultural levels. So as you might know, and it shouldn't be of a surprise, that if you go back all the way like to episode 2 or 3, somewhere in there, I've forgotten what all of them are about right now, we talk about how your early childhood experiences shaped who you are today. It does not mean that you're fixed and you can't change, but it had a huge impact, at least to how you got to where you are. And if you made a change, it was still a reason for why you made the change. That's the key thing. So when you talk about what is self-esteem, it's your subjective evaluation of your worth. It's how you value yourself. It encompasses beliefs about yourself as well as your emotional state, such as, if you feel like I'm very successful, I feel triumphant, or if you kind of are always feeling like you're in despair, if you have great pride, or if you're very shameful. These are all things that are embedded in the essence of your self-esteem. And those early childhood experiences, even going through adolescence, which really shape you, are part of where these drives come from, so to speak. This is why when people are parenting, I can't begin to tell you, not that I'm no expert on parenting, but I can only tell you how important it is, that nature versus nurture piece, which we all hear those kind of terms, to really prepare your children for some of the challenges in the world. And I would even say this right now, and had a great conversation with someone during this pandemic that has small children. She is using this opportunity that her school district is in e-learning, and she has a 3rd grader and a 4th grader. And she has decided to use this time to give them study tools and different things that are going to make them successful throughout their academic career. Her approach was so different. She created a workspace for them. They look at their school schedule together. They plan it. She actually gives them control, but helps them understand how to manage it. And we're talking about in 3rd and 4th graders. And I said, the fact that she's so hands-on, but the key thing about it is she's helping them to build self-esteem, to know that this doesn't have to be as debilitating as it seems. Remember, as your focus goes, your energy follows. That was a podcast last week. So I'm gonna give this fair warning. And I say this to people all the time, that if you're the parent that's constantly complaining about the pandemic and how it's inconvenient and how you hate being in the situation, if your children hear that, what they're doing, whether they're small children or they're teens, they're internalizing your negativity. So if you're struggling with the pandemic and what you're projecting to your children is your struggle, they're going to internalize that struggle with you and not know how to make the proper adjustments. Everything happens for a reason, and this reason really sucks. There is no reason for the pandemic except for the fact that it's a virus and it happens. But the thing is, what do you do with something when it happens? As your focus goes, your energy will follow. Check out episode 14. It's worth listening to. So pretty much when we talk about self-esteem, in a nutshell, it's what you think about yourself. And the key thing is that can be positive or that can be negative. That's ultimately going to be incumbent upon you, but it's also shaped. But I want people, when we talk about getting to that best version of yourself, to be prepared to embrace the things that you struggle with, to challenge them head on so that you can make the change. Remember, another episode was talking about challenge and change, and that the words challenge and change, by their essence of their definition, if you look them up, have got nothing to do with negativity. They're about a shift or a movement in a position. But we tend to culturally or socially to assign negativity to a challenge or change. And once you internalize it, it becomes your focus. Everything in your action follows, hence your energy. So I'm trying to say, when you get to the best version of yourself, you have to be willing to challenge some of the established concepts we have within our culture about just because something has to change doesn't mean it has to be inconvenient. What's the 3 things I say we really hate to have monkeyed with? Comfort, convenience, and control. Most people get really, really unhappy when they get pushed out of their comfort zone, which will be another episode we'll talk about, is understanding the sphere of your comfort zone, what it looks like and how to navigate it and how to work it to your advantage, especially when you step out those areas that are comfortable. So, nutshell, self-concept is pretty much what you think about yourself, whether it's positive or negative. Toolbox time, as we have every single episode of Maya. Take out your emotional intelligence. We take it out every single show, but I'm always going to remind you, and I'm always going to tell you, what are you taking out that toolbox? Your EI? That refers to your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotion. Self-esteem is so strongly predicated on the emotions that we experience in life, and they shape us. So go ahead, leave the toolbox open, take out your EI, sit it on the table, look at it. Hopefully you've been using it all week from the last episode. You didn't just tuck it away and only take it out when I ask you to. I hope you're to the point now where you're taking it out on your own because you're like, how am I seeing this situation? How am I controlling my emotions during the situation? And have I properly evaluated my emotions? You should be doing this on a regular basis. It should become a habit for you using your EI. And if it's not, I feel like I haven't broken through to you yet. If nothing else, if you walk away from any episode understanding that emotional intelligence will be the most important thing you can embody from any of these parts of my podcast, it's the most important thing. So we now have EI on the table. That was our toolbox time moment. Let's move on and talk about a little bit more. What is the source of self-esteem? And as I mentioned, in childhood, parents have a significant influence, or caregivers, whoever was the adult that you were their charge for. Sometimes, for some of us, it wasn't our parents biologically. It might have been grandparents. It might have been an aunt, uncle, or cousin. We all have different backgrounds. So whoever that kind of figure was of the adult, who was the caregiver, could be the interchangeable word. They had a significant influence on your self-esteem and pretty much can be considered the main source of the positive and negative experiences that you have. So we talk about terms like helicopter parents, those parents that are, some people feel overbearing, like every step and every move their child makes, they're there, they're monitoring it, and they don't really give their child enough independence to learn how to be successful or how to fail independently. They're there all the time. That often can create a sense of insecurity and the inability of understanding how to be independent. There has to be balance to it. On the opposite side of that, you have what's the free range parent, like, hey, see you later, just text me, let me know where you're at, whose house you going to? Bad idea. There needs to be a balance struck between how much autonomy you give your children, when you give them autonomy, when you allow them to go out, venture out and experience something, to know what failure feels like, to know they don't like it, and to learn from it. When your child fails at something, opposed to coddling them, and you can still coddle them, but don't overdo it. Sit down and really talk about what the experience was about and why it actually happened. That's the key thing. Getting some meaning out of a negative thing and to let them know life is actually full of mistakes. It's okay you made this mistake. Let's figure out how we can fix this. That creates a sense of independence and confidence that making a mistake doesn't have to be end all to be all. That's a key thing. So based on how you are as an adult, it's going to have a lot to do with probably the interactions you have with your parents. Were they authoritative? Were they more nurturing and supportive? It just really depends. Were they extreme, disciplinarians with you? And you kind of felt like there was no room for error. Believe it or not, extreme discipline can be equally as debilitating as giving too much freedom. I know. There's no manual to this. It's just kind of thinking beyond the idea of control, convenience and comfort, so to speak. All right. But what are the other influences besides just the idea of your parent or caregiver that help to shape your self-esteem? Well, for school-age children, we know that academic achievement becomes a big source of how they shape their self-esteem and their development. That being good students, and remember, there's always a large part of school-age children. We're talking about from the moment kids get in first grade, probably all the way through high school. And by the time they get to college, we kind of expected that we've inserted a certain amount of, you should now know how to do this. But one of the biggest things we tend to do throughout those school-age years is push how the important education really is with them. So for kids, education becomes a center point of success for them. And if they're good academically, they tend to have good self-esteem. But if they're constantly failing and there's not, so to speak, a safety net or someone to see there's something going on or to help them to address why they're struggling, that can become long-term debilitating beyond them just being students. And that's the key thing that we know about other influences. When we talk about moving beyond the school age here, we understand with middle age, so to speak, that emotional stability, socialization, and self-awareness play into how self-esteem evolves and or devolves once you kind of get more of that independence and you're on your own. So I say emotional stability. Here's how that plays into it. If you were a child that had relatively good emotional stability, which means you felt loved, cared for, nurtured, supported, you also got a certain amount of autonomy, you might, generally speaking, have good emotional stability and tend to gravitate towards relationships that also allow you to be more emotional stable. Whereas you notice, and you may know someone like this, or it could be you. So remember, we're not always looking on the outside of ourselves. The whole thing about Maya, my ambition, your ambition, is we're looking inward. We're not assessing what others are doing. We are assessing ourselves to get to the best version of ourselves. But you may have made a mental note, not so much about yourself, but about others, and said, so-and-so always seems to be in really, really negative relationships with people. I'll give you a good example. I have a very close friend who is involved in what I feel very debilitating relationships with people. And there's no doubt about it, and we've talked about this. She has low self-esteem. She's afraid to be alone. So hence, she entertains these relationships that minimize her. And we've talked about this, and she's been in therapy. But there's a part of her that is so afraid of being alone, she'd rather suffer in silence and deal in relationships that are not healthy than getting to the best version of herself. We'll talk about that a bit more down the road. But when you talk about getting to know the selves, this is interesting. You're like, selves? No, you don't have multiple personalities, so don't get nervous. But there's 3 levels of self-evaluation that really start in childhood that we're going to talk about. Not too deep. I'm not going to dive too deep into it. And they're relational to what are called the real self, the ideal self, and the dreaded self. So those are the 3 amigos, so to speak, of the 3 levels of self-evaluation, because self-esteem is all about self-concept, which can only come from self-evaluation that you're doing unconsciously without often knowing that you're doing it. So when we talk about 3 levels of self-evaluation, they're encompassed in a couple different developmental states. So the first state that often people engage in is called the moral judgment stage. And it's described where when you talk about whether it's the real, the idea, or the dreaded self, and mind you, when I talk about these 3 dimensions of self, it's the real self is exactly who you are. There's no doubt about it. You may not know who it is exactly yet, but it's who you are at the core of your being. The ideal self is who you want to be. You may have an idea of who the real self is, and you may not like it, and you have this more concrete idea of who you'd like to be, or you look at what other people are and you think that's the kind of person I want to be. And then there's a dreaded self, everything about yourself that you don't want to be, but you are. So those are those kind of 3 domains and what they fit into. So that first kind of moral judgment that you use for self-evaluation, when you talk about that real idea and dreaded selves, they're stereotypical labels like being good or being a bad person. So in your state, as you see yourself, do you feel your real self, who you are, in your self-concept? Do you think you are a good person? Do you think you're a bad person? Do you think, in a real self, I'm a good person, but idealistically, I really wish I did this better, had this part of my character be better? Or are you embodying everything about yourself you dislike? So you, the dreaded you feel like you're the dreaded self, whereas I'm a bad person. I make bad decisions. I mistreat people. Sometimes people are aware of this, and other times they are not. The idea and the real are really disposed more by action and behavioral habits. So you do things, you're courteous to people. You go out of your way to do things that good people do, versus the dreaded self is often, hindered with bad habits. So it might be the kind of person, you're a poor listener. You talk over people. You do things only thinking of yourself. You don't care if you hurt people. You have a lot of bad habits, so to speak. You only think really in dimensions of yourself when you're that dreaded self, so to speak. In that moral judgment stage, that's kind of where those stereotypical labels, good and bad, fall in. So when you talk about self-esteem and you talk about how you see yourself, at this level right here, would you say, I see myself as a good person? I see myself as a dreaded person, so to speak? Or would you say, I think generally speaking, I'm a good person, but ideally, that's where the ideal self comes in, I'd like to improve this to be better at it. I want to be better at this. I want to be better at kind of doing this opposed to doing that. It's about actions and behavior. Here's a strange thing. It's not good or bad, but here's how good or bad habits can die hard with you. If you were that person as a kid who was always taught to brush your teeth before you wake up or go to bed and make up your bed when you go to sleep in it, you tend to do it as an adult. This is how habits can die hard. And you look at it as a person who that person's got good habits because they do the things that you're supposed to do. Whereas some people who weren't raised that way, they might brush their teeth, but they may get in and out of bed and not do it, because not that they're a bad person, but it was a habit that was formed. So that moral thing is, if your mother or father was like, don't you dare leave that room without making up your bed, that tends to stick with you. So you might have been a good person, generally speaking, had good hygienes and took care of things, but didn't make up your bed. So you may say, you know what my ideal self is? I really want to do better about those detail things that I don't do well. Just a moral thing, kind of saying I need to be better at some things. Another judgment stage that's interesting, that starts in childhood and progresses over time. Usually you get through these by the time you get to young adulthood, so to speak, and then you kind of shape them more, is the ego development stage. And this is described specifically like for that, let's say, idea or real self. It's about traits that are based on attitudes and actions. The ego, if we talk about Freud, is that kind of in the front, need to do this now kind of sense. But this isn't Freudian. But you hear the word ego and people think big. So if you think about ego, it's going to be a little bit opposite of that moral part. It's really about you want to do things based on your attitudes and actions. So when you think about the dreaded side of this may help you understand it more. If in this stage you identify with dreaded, it means you're going to be more of, you feel like you failed at meeting social expectations. You're more self-centered. So the ego stage is less about the internal focus, whereas the moral development stage is more about the internal focus of yourself, how you self-evaluate. And the ego development stage is how you see yourself in your outside worlds, your social settings, your cultural settings. And then it's like, the ideal self is like this, my real self is this way. So now you can kind of see the fine line where these personal development stages step in when you think about your self-concept. And the kind of final stage, and it's 3 levels of talking about the real idea and dreaded self, is that self-understanding stage. And this is really that adulthood side that you're progressing through. And when you talk about self-understanding, when you talk about idea or real, it's having a unified identity. So it's not so much that you're split between who you are and who you'd like to be. Those things are far more in line. Now, we're always evolving, we're always maturing, and we're growing. But there's always more of a closer congruency of who you are when you have kind of merged, you've gotten closer to where you want to be as a person. But we keep growing. Whereas on the other side of this, the dreaded self, so to speak, feels that their life has been a failure up to this point. They've never met a single role expectation. Whereas a person who is more on the idea or real side, they feel like they have met the expectations that they have made for themselves, but they also feel they match up in regards to social and cultural ideas. They feel balanced that way. So it doesn't mean in your real self that you're 100% of who you'd like to be, because there might still be this idea piece. And sometimes the idea, I don't want you to underthink the idea piece, because the idea can still be a tug and pull, because some people can have a distance between the two. So the idea self can still be difficult for people, because you may be like, this is who I am, but this is who I want to be. But it doesn't mean you're abandoning every piece of who you are, if that makes any sense. That's the growth point of all this. But the self-understanding stage is you exactly get that piece. Like, this is who I am, this is who I want to be, and I want it to be more congruent. Whereas when you're dreaded, there's nothing congruent. Everything feels like a failure to you. So these are all the self-evaluation pieces that exist. And this is where the self-concept comes from, which in essence is self-esteem. So there are 3 states that people I'd like to say it's interesting. I feel we sometimes kind of maybe shift in these a little, but you're one more than the other. So these 3 states are shattered, vulnerable, and strong. When we talk about a shattered state, that refers to not regarding oneself as valuable or lovable. Now, usually people who are in shattered, they're there until they can progress to something different. They can see themselves in a different light, have a different experience, change the trajectory of the personal journey that they're on. They just don't see any value in who they are, which means there's a lot of things that they will agree with that, generally speaking, they may not want to, but because they see no value in fighting for themselves, there's no value in fighting for anything differently. They will settle. Whereas a vulnerable state, on the flip side, generally is more about positive self-image. However, and I think a lot of people probably sit in this particular state for a while, especially as we're maturing and growing as individuals and having different experiences and stepping outside of our comfort zone, our environments with people. This is one I think, especially in young adulthood, I think we're very frequently, and even in adolescence, if you're not broken and shattered, I think you stay in the vulnerable state longer than probably any other, because it's generally you will have positive self-image. However, the self-esteem is also vulnerable to perceived risk. And although a person may outwardly seem like they've got self-confidence, remember we talked about that, they project that they're self-confident, it doesn't mean under the surface that's really what's going on. It could be just the opposite. Now think about it. If you go back to your most vulnerable time, it often tends to be your adolescent or teenage years. Generally in childhood, you're a little bit more open-minded and you have no idea exactly what the world has in store for you. You don't. As a child, I'm talking about from birth to about 11 or 12, maybe even 10. The world is kind of shifting these days. You don't have the same fear of what's out there because generally speaking, there's been security. Now, mind you, for those people who did not seek security, they very well may be in that shattered stage. So the vulnerability piece never comes in because they never see any value in who they are. But generally speaking, if you had any semblance of stability in childhood, maybe it was a disciplinarian, maybe it was authoritative type parent, whatever the case may be, your helicopter parent, free range, whatever, you felt stable enough in who you were because there was some nurture piece there. But as we enter into different environments, we tend to be challenged and we grow. And this is where your self-image, especially in adolescence, I can't tell you how many parents, they struggle with this. They're like, I don't understand why so-and-so is behaving like this because she's smart, she's confident, she's outgoing. I can't tell you how many times I have that conversation in the scope of my job when they bring their children into the ER because they're having depression, anxiety, unfortunately, often suicidal thoughts. They're doing self-harming. And the parents are literally confused because what that child was projecting to them, that self-confidence, was that they were okay, involved in sports, good grades. And they're like, I have no idea where this is coming from. This is not the child I know. That might be correct. At least a piece of that child you don't know. And I say that because once we get into middle school, junior high, high school, we often move into different social circles and we learn new things about ourselves and about others. And we're shifting and we're changing. It doesn't mean we move fully away from who we are, but we're experimenting in different ways emotionally and mentally and physically we're changing. Hormonally, teens are all over the board. So the vulnerability piece, especially for young adults, this continues even through college because you have another, I would say life-changing experience where you move into a new sphere of independence and autonomy that now you really get to kick the wheels on your own. And again, you can feel very vulnerable at that time. So I really feel from my personal experience, as well as working with different clients, that this is a particular stage to me that we're in probably the longest, that it's probably where we learn the most about ourselves, emotionally, mentally, physically, financially. This is where you figure out a whole lot about yourself in regards to self-esteem. So if you happen to get in that situation where all of a sudden, especially if you have a teenager or you have a college student and they start doing stuff you don't understand, just know it's a natural shift in the change in their environment. A lot of adolescents right now are struggling with e-learning because they're not with their peers and they don't know this is a key time for peer interaction. So you put them behind a computer screen because if it's not TikTok, whatever they're doing, Facebook, whatever, Snapchat, they want that type of social interaction electronically, not school. So they want the in-person piece. So if you start to see shifts, just know that means there's a vulnerability piece for them trying to make an adjustment to a new variable that's been introduced into their life. The question is, be mindful of it and help them to navigate it, opposed to don't turn into the focus, which is negative, because this is a challenge right now because of the situation with the pandemic. So if your child is struggling, opposed to kind of heaping on the negativity, like, I know this really sucks, we have to do it this way. No, go the opposite direction and say, well, I understand this. Work is like this sometimes too. This is part of the world. So here's what we're going to do. You're struggling with school. Let's sit down and look at what the coursework is, when it's due. Let's structure this out for you because I know that you can do this because You're an excellent student. This may even be harder for students that are not good students. Now you've got a bigger challenge. They already maybe don't like school, and now you're asking me to focus it on a different capacity. So just know the vulnerability for teens, just like for adults, has increased exponentially during this time because our 3 C's are fully negated. There is no control, the comfort has been moved, and nothing about anything is convenient at this time. So just know this stage is huge, and shifts happen back and forth doing this. And that final state of self-esteem, which I think we get to much later in life when we get stability emotionally, mentally, physically, when we're comfortable with ourselves, is that strong state of self-esteem. And it's that positive self-image. And there's enough strength within you that the risk and challenges that come along don't subdue your self-esteem. So for instance, some people have thrived during the pandemic. They didn't see it as, yeah, this is hella inconvenient. I don't feel like doing it, but got to do it because guess what? I can't fix it right now, but this too shall pass. And they've just moved on. I know people financially that have gotten better. I'm going to tell you what my approach has been absolutely during the pandemic. There was no money to be spent, so I saved money, paid off bills. I actually started cooking, something I actually didn't like, but in turn started working out. And one of my long-term goals was always to be in better shape. I managed to achieve all those things when I was challenged and had a change in how my life was progressing. And I was a person who was still going to work every day. So remember I said about challenge and change. Those are two things we put in your toolbox a couple episodes ago. Look up the definitions. It's got nothing to do with negativity. It's about a change or shift in position, moving in another direction. You can take it or leave it, but most people want to assign negativity to those things, and you shouldn't, because what's episode 14 about? As your focus goes, your energy will follow, and that's key. All right, so we kind of got into the more, let's be clinical speaking, Maya, and talk about states of self-esteem and things of that nature. But let's kind of talk a bit about what are the signs of a compromised self-esteem? How do you know? And I'm going to say this from personal experience. There will be shifts in your self-esteem. Generally speaking, like I talked about that vulnerability piece, but as an adult, you learn how to navigate them. So even though you may have that down low, you pop back up because you know what? You're like, okay, let me get my head out the sand on this. Let me move forward. I know what's going on here. I'm just allowing myself to go the wrong direction with it. So, but what are some signs that your self-esteem might be compromised? Remember, this was what Maya is all about. It's about the best version of yourself. And the only way you get to the best version of yourself is, one, to be honest, do the self-evaluation. So now we're taking all those previous episodes that have culminated to this and say, what is your self-concept? Because if you're struggling with something or you're stuck, one of the first things you have to do is self-evaluate and say, let me start at the core of, am I really comfortable with who I am? Or if I put up this great facade and I'm just kind of going through the motions. One of the worst sayings I hate hearing people say is, fake it till you make it. No, be who you are. Because faking it till you make it is just being disingenuous to yourself. And when we tell people stuff like that, it's like you're setting yourself up for failure. Because what happens if you keep faking because you never make it? Then what? So how about this? Be comfortable where you are in your life, opposed to, I want this right now, so I believe I'm just going to act this way. No. Be comfortable where you are in the moment. And if the ideal self is something different, know what you want to change and make the plans to make that shift, to make those moves, to get to that ideal best version of yourself. But some key things to know: you might have a compromised self-esteem. And these are interesting, and we're going to dive into these a bit more. You easily give into arguments. You easily get depressed. You cannot deal with criticism. You're actually overcritical about a lot of other people. You depend on others to make decisions for you, and you avoid challenge and change as much as possible. More importantly, you're a bit oversensitive about things. These are some things that tell you at the core of who you are, there's something here that's not quite right if you keep having these reoccurring patterns with these specific things. Someone's like, well, I can be that way. And remember I said, we can get in our feelings at times. That doesn't mean that you have wavering self-esteem. It just means it's a situation that elicited a very specific emotion out of you. It doesn't mean all of a sudden that you doubt yourself, because that's what I learned about myself last week. Something happened that brought up a lot of unresolved issues that I had. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, whoa. I think I have good self-esteem. But why all of a sudden am I feeling really vulnerable? And I had to go back and process that. And I got to the root of what it was, of why it bothered me. So let's talk a bit more about the 8 warning signs that you have low self-esteem. And I'm going to add a couple more into those ones that I just talked about. The first one I mentioned is that you easily give into arguments. Now, here's what I'm saying about this. When I say you easily give into arguments, what I'm not saying is that you like to argue. No. If something has credence that you need to stand up for, especially with yourself, find that voice. You need to do it. You don't need to engage in every conversation that turns into an argument with somebody. But if it's something that's going to impact you emotionally, mentally, physically, or financially, find a way to have that conversation. It may not be at that moment, but if you easily just say, I don't want to do it because you want to avoid conflict at all cost, and you disagree to something that you don't necessarily believe in, that means you are absolutely at every opportunity subduing the chance to express yourself and to make sure what's really important, that your needs are met. Because if you keep saying, okay, but nothing is becoming advantageous for you, it's not working to your advantage, it's not yielding something for you all the time, everything you do doesn't yield something for you. But you shouldn't be going through life doing something for somebody else all the time and never taking care of yourself. What's the other 2 words I talk about all the time? Knowing when to be selfish and knowing when to be selfless. Look the 2 words up and ask yourself, do I understand how to navigate those waters and my relationships with people? Or am I all willing to say, okay, if that's what you want, that's fine. And then that's where that communication stuff comes in, that passive aggressive or that aggressive person. Learn how to be assertive. And this is finding your voice. And my thing is this, take an argument and turn it into a discussion. How about that? You may say, I feel like we're disagreeing right now on something. And this is a really important conversation. A really, really important conversation. But I don't think this is time to talk about it. I like to revisit this at another time when I think cooler heads prevail, because I don't want to say something I don't mean to say, and I want to clear my head. So I don't want to argue. I want to have a discussion. Most people love to argue. What they tell you, heat and conflict, people are drawn to it. Part of the evolution of getting to the best version of yourself is that you will stop engaging in arguments that have no benefit or no purpose. Here's a comment from, I think it's Zach Ari. Maybe I'm saying your name right. What about looting? I disagree with it, but I avoid arguments, but because I'm mature, not somebody with low self-esteem. Good example of something. That's what I'm talking about, Ree, is like knowing when the conversation is worth having. So when I say you disengage from argument, I mean, you avoid arguments that have credence and value. So you're right. Some conversations aren't even worth having. Some arguments are worth engaging in. And that's one, you're right. Be the mature person. Because you know what? It's a matter of, that's an opinion conversation, right or wrong. And at the end of the day, guess what we don't get to do? Decide if it's right or wrong. Everyone's going to do that on their own. So I'm like you, that's actually a conversation or an argument I'm not going to engage in. So that's actually a very good point about knowing when to take the high road. Another warning sign. If you find you're always apologizing unnecessarily, it's often believed that everything that goes wrong, probably for you, is because of something that you've done. And that's probably because completely you're unaware of your self-worth. You ever meet that person who is so self-deprecating where they literally everything, oh, it's my fault. I have a friend who's just like that. Everything someone does wrong, she will take in the criticism, even though it may not be her fault at all, and feel like, and say, well, you know, if I had done this, then this probably wouldn't have happened. Okay, that might be true, but it doesn't mean that at the core of the conversation, argument, disagreement, or situation, that it's actually your fault and that you have to apologize. Being a bigger person and getting to the best version of yourself is actually knowing when you should apologize. If you know you were dead wrong and you know you did something offensive to someone because it would offend you, then have the courage and maturity to say, I'm sorry. But don't apologize for everything all the time just because you feel like you have to, just to kind of keep the peace. That means maybe you need to look at the person you keep trying to keep the peace with and say, why is it that I'm always apologizing for things that they should be apologizing for? And that's when you might decide you need to have a conversation if it's a relationship that you value. That's another podcast coming up, how to value, rank relationships. Knowing when they're important, and when they are important, knowing how to navigate them so that you don't become consumed and that you don't get to express yourself because you give a relationship too much value where it shouldn't have value. Key things, and that's things that people struggle with. Another comment coming from someone watching the show, Pitford, P.S., hello. Sometimes we have to check ourselves. One time I had to question why I felt bothered about an interaction. How did both parties contribute to the outcome? That's emotional intelligence, Philip, right there. Step back. One of the things I talked about in the emotional intelligence episode was that if something elicits a response from you, anger, and we're going to talk about using the negative ones. So like anger, fear, anxiety, you felt vulnerable. The first question you have to ask yourself is, why am I feeling like this? And most of the time, it's a situation or the person involved in that situation. Because certain people, don't you feel like they know exactly what your trigger is and they can just hit it? And then you know what? Once you know that, that becomes incumbent upon you to use your EI, emotional intelligence, not to allow someone to have that kind of power over you. But it's true. Self-awareness, serious, is about asking yourself those questions. Another thing to be mindful of when you talk about 8 warning signs that you could have low self-esteem is, do you easily get depressed? Depression most often stems from low self-esteem. People who suffer from low self-esteem, usually they're not very well socialized, they lack confidence, they rarely try something new because they don't feel good enough to be out there. Their self-worth is at the bottom. So if you don't value you, chances are your interactions positively in any other function or faction of your life is not going to happen. And this is why you have to look at, especially if you're dealing with young children and you can see they're struggling with their self-worth or their self-concept, they know nothing about what that means. Because remember, we help to instill that. But if you see that wavering thing, or they don't want to try something new, challenge them a little bit and say, well, here, it's not a bad thing. Let's just try this out. And if you don't like it, at least we tried, right? You might end up liking it. And how many times have you introduced something to a child or to yourself and go, I thought I was absolutely going to hate that. And I turned out, I kind of enjoyed it and want to try it again. Challenging yourself that way. Having the confidence that, here's the thing, if you fail at something or you don't do your best, it doesn't mean that was the worst thing that you tried it. And that's the key thing about people who get depressed easily. They just often, they have a fear that's rooted in the fact that they just don't feel good enough to do anything right. Number 4, a lot of people don't handle any form of criticism, whether it's constructive or not. And this is something that's a toughie, because within your respective life, real talk, if you've been bombarded with criticism all the time, chances of it being constructive or not, you really don't care, because all you see is the negativity. Now, I always say, this is where I want you to be mindful. We talked about communication styles in a couple episodes. I think it was 10 or something. That when you need to deliver input, because I think criticism, even within this word, is not a good word. Do it with tact. You can give someone criticism when it's constructive without labeling them or making them feel insufficient. So especially like, say, if you manage people and you have someone who's not performing the job correctly, how you approach them to say, I need to talk to you. And sometimes you get these conversations in job performance reviews. Sometimes maybe you have to you notice someone isn't performing well. I would tell you, find a strength to support the weakness and say, hey, I noticed something. You are spot on with this, bam, bam, bam. But I noticed right here when I was looking at something, I saw this right here. So I just want to make a red flag. Would you ever told how to do that? Because one, never make the assumption that someone was trained properly. That's the first thing. But in the event that they weren't, you're not putting any onus. You're giving them a heads up that there's an area of improvement that's needed more than anything else. So how you give criticism is key. But for people that are in that struggle state, they're never going to hear anything you say, even if it's constructive good, because they don't see any value in who they are. And of course, I would do it wrong because I don't ever do anything right. So that's how they're going to see this. So how you share when someone is not doing the right thing is going to be so important. But how you take it in, because remember, this is about the best version of yourself. When someone tells you something, and I'm going to say this, everybody is not going to come at you and say things to you the way that they need to. Let's be honest. A lot of people in our society have really poor communication skills. So that means you're going to have to put on I'm working on my communication skills and decipher it. So if someone says something and it rubs you the wrong way, ask yourself, is there any truth in what they're saying? And if it is, I need to step back and listen and pay attention. But if you feel there is no truth in it, that's when you have to say, and this is interesting, someone just said this today. If you hear something more than 2 or 3 times about yourself, you might want to stop back and evaluate it. It doesn't mean it's a firm truth, but outside feedback often can give insight of how people are perceiving you. Remember, self-confidence is how we project ourselves. Self-esteem is how we see ourselves internally and how we see ourselves in the world. So You might be projecting something to someone that you don't mean to because you don't see it that way. So they may say, hey, when you do this, you don't know. I know a manager at my job who is the most abrasive and rudest person I've ever met. And I can't understand how she possibly has a job. I'm being for real about this. I'm sure she's good at her job, but her communication skills are god awful. It's so abrasive. And everyone around her says it. So I think it's amazing that no one's ever sat her down and said, several of the staff members really have noticed that the way you communicate is a little kind of abrasive, just to give you a heads up. So when you get feedback from somebody, step back and say, 1, is there any truth in it? 2, can I not see the forest for the trees? Are they telling me something that I didn't see about myself? Another good episode, I talked about Johari's window, those discovery realms of how things you know about yourself, things that and people don't, things that you don't know about yourself and other people do. It's interesting how things can be revealed and how that feedback could actually be the thing that can help you grow and have a better self-concept. Let's jump into 5 of the 8 warning signs that you may have low self-esteem. Do you find happiness in buying new things? And this is a tricky one because someone might be like, excuse you, just because I like to shop, does it mean I have low self-esteem? It does not. This is where this comes from. It's been looked at often, especially in adolescence, because that's where value is often asserted very early about material things, and value come in about self-worth. Often happens very early in childhood and adolescence. That very often people with low self-esteem have a materialistic nature. Shopping for materialistic possessions becomes their way of coping with low self-worth. So that's kind of another saying I don't like, is keeping up with the Joneses. Okay, no. Whoever the hell the Joneses are, you don't have to keep up with them, because if keeping up with them is going to keep you financially strapped because you really can't afford it, because you want to put out this air of self-confidence, or you're that fake it till you make it. I'm going to say it again. I don't like that saying either. Don't fake nothing, be you. Accept it. And if you want more out of where you are in your life, then go get it. Because here's my thing. Some people fake their entire lives and don't realize it to the end. Or then they become depressed and withdrawn because they just realize, I can't seem to make it. Well, if you were just being you in the first place, it's not being someone else or trying to be someone else, you wouldn't be in this position. And that's just tough love right there. So don't say fake it till you make it, because you might fake your whole damn life away. Real talk. That's the second time I've made that reference. So things like keeping up with the Joneses and faking it till you make it. It's all about people who have a materialistic mentality, believing that somehow what I have, not who I am, gives me greater self-worth. That's a dangerous thing, because if you lose everything, it's funny, that show, I think it's on Netflix, called Schitt's Creek, is all about a family that loses everything and their struggle to adjust to it. Actually, a very interesting show, by the way. Let's go on to number 6. Being overcritical about others. And this is interesting. Often when people have low self-esteem, they want to focus on other people so they don't have to focus on themselves. So they often can be very controlling with other people. This is interesting. They want to navigate what you do. And you often see this sometimes in relationships. And believe it or not, this piece is different for men and women. But I'm not going to differentiate in that right now in this episode. But they are, especially with their partners, you see this controlling piece, very critical of, you could do this better, or you didn't do that, and you didn't do this, or I expected that, or that kind of thing. Also, there tends to be an insecurity, and you may see a lot of feelings of jealousy or protectiveness because they're overcritical about what other people do. So if you find that you're always judging other people, oh, look at this person, what they did isn't good enough, and you don't ever kind of reflect on yourself, that speaks volumes about you, because they're doing them. You don't have to do them. So hence, being overly critical. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we don't all people watch and we all don't make our little snide comments about maybe she didn't need to wear those biking shorts, or I don't understand why she has pink hair, or yes, why are you walking out the house with a shower cap on? I'm not gonna lie, I've done it. I have. I don't do it all the time though, but there'll be things that might jump out at me and I'll be like, well, that looks ridiculous, but that's my opinion. I just think it's ridiculous. But here's the thing. I don't say anything to somebody about it unless somebody's with me. I'll be like, look at that over there. That's wrong. And yes, it's talking about somebody. And yes, it's petty. But look, I'm human. And if something catches my eye and I think it's not right, I'm mentally going to do it. But I never go so far where I really get critical about people and who they are. Because at the core of that person with the pink hair, they might be the flyest, nicest, kindest, givingest person in the world. So don't let the exterior fool you. Seriously. Because I've met people like that where you judge them and you're like, you're nothing like I thought. So being overcritical, you could miss out on some amazing opportunities with people because you think you know who they are, or because of who they are don't meet your standards. Do you meet your standards? That's the first question. Let's move on to number 7. Often people who have low self-esteem, they'll depend on others to make their decisions. They'll find it very difficult to make decisions. Instead, they like for others to do it for them. They want to follow somebody else's lead. They often find it a daunting task to speak for themselves or to even have an opinion. They just kind of want to fall back. Now, this doesn't mean that you're, someone's like, does that mean that person's antisocial? Not necessarily. Those are different things. This is a person that lives for other people to literally be in control of their life because they don't want the responsibility of making the wrong decision. Because if I make the wrong decision, then I got to be accountable for it. But if you told me to do something, or if I followed your lead and it turned out to be the wrong decision, I just stay in the shadows and I don't have to deal with any of the criticism that comes with it. Not having the confidence that you can make the right decisions or you're worth speaking your opinion to somebody else. That's where that self-worth comes in. You'll take the risk when you value who you are, because anything worth having may have a certain amount of risk to it. Being able to express yourself may have a certain amount of risk to it. You may not have the popular opinion. Let's be honest. You want to see the thing right now in our country that's dividing people? Let's talk about the political situation in this country with Democrats, Republicans, Trump, whatever, Biden. I have seen things from people that really have taken me aback, and I'm processing it because it's people that I respect. But I'm seeing a side of them. I'm going, I don't particularly care for this. Because when you support this, I guess you're going to probably tell me you're going to seg out what you think isn't right. But when you stand with somebody, it's a reflection of who you are. It's complicated. These are difficult times, and we are very divided in this country for this very piece about expression and opinion. And there are many people in this situation who are just falling back, like, not doing it at all. So I have to say, I've seen lots of people express themselves. And I was like, okay. Another and a final of the 8 warning signs of low self-esteem is that you avoid challenge or you're overly sensitive. So you're scared to try a new task and you avoid doing anything and you get frustrated very easily. So the minute something means you're going to have to step out that comfort zone or you're unfamiliar with it, you want to avoid it. Or you're very sensitive to things. So someone will share something with you. It's part of the criticism part too. And you're like, I don't know how I feel about that. It just makes me uncomfortable. I know someone's like that. Everything that isn't the norm makes that person uncomfortable. And I said, why are you uncomfortable? You don't even know anything about the situation. You're already thinking the worst before anything has actually happened. Just kind of the doom and gloom idea about the oversensitivity, assuming the worst outcomes with things. I'm like, there can be a silver lining even in the worst of situations. You can make lemonade out of lemons at any time. It's about perspective on things. So let's do a temperature check, because we've talked about obviously these 8 things and how they play into it. And remember, you can always go to mayakai.com and you can go to the podcast section, resources, and I'm going to add some additional resources you can read into. But let's do a quick temperature check. Do you feel at times you have experienced any of these signs? Because here's the thing, we're perfectly natural and we're normal and we're human, which means at points of times we may have some wavering in how we feel about things. It doesn't mean you have low self-esteem. It could be a situation that's making maybe you feel overly critical. I'll be honest, there are times at work I feel I'm very overly critical, but I realize it's the bureaucracy at my job that makes me feel that way. I identify what the issue is. I don't think I have low self-esteem. So put this in context. Don't overthink this, because you may not be any of these things. You may have experienced one of these things at one point of time. These are just kind of red flags of, hey, if you keep experiencing this, maybe you want to do like a little inventory, a little self-concept inventory of what's going on with you. So while we talked about things are warning signs, let's talk about ways to improve self-esteem. You can never stop working on you, the best version of yourself, which means your self-esteem. Some key things we note about this is that when you accept and appreciate yourself, when you're optimistic and motivated, when you stay fit and healthy, when you dress well and keep yourself and your surroundings clean, you tend to feel better about yourself. These are all positive things. So when we talk about appreciating yourself, we're going to keep this simple. Give yourself some well-deserved love and appreciation every single day. Don't always look for the big things to be a reason to appreciate yourself. Celebrate even the small things that you do every day, because every day isn't promised, 1, that you will have it, or 2, that it will be great. So appreciate yourself. So if you finish a task, you say, you know what? I got all my stuff that was on my to-do list, and God knows I didn't feel like doing it. Hey, you go, girlfriend, pat yourself on the back. Here's a big one. Forgive your mistakes. We are faulty humans who usually tend to let our emotions get the better of us. We'll turn a mountain to a molehill instantly just because our emotions are what makes us so uniquely human. And they can consume us. This is why I want everyone to work on their EI, their emotional intelligence. Admit that mistakes are natural, and you know what? They're the only thing you can call your own and don't nobody else wants. The question is, when you make a mistake, do you evaluate it, do you learn from it, and you move forward so you don't repeat it? That's the key thing about mistakes. B, be optimistic. This is the third thing about life, and motivate yourself. Let getting things done be your motivation. Make a list of things. If you've been struggling, you felt in the funk, make a list of things that you want to accomplish for the week. And each day, take on those tasks and accomplish it. Keep the goals small, and treat yourself for getting things done and take it day to day. People always want to take off, big chunks of things, have large goals. Little things lead to big things. So have good foundations into your little things and be optimistic. So maybe yesterday was god awful, but it doesn't mean that tomorrow is going to be the same way. But a lot of people think like that. They get in their negative mind state. They're like, oh God, this whole week is just going to suck because today sucked. No, that was today. Today is gone and over with. You can't get it back. The question is, are you going to let yesterday become another daunting task for existence tomorrow? No, get over it and move past it. And most people love to ruminate. There's something about negativity that draws us in as humans. I have no idea why. 4, don't compare yourself with others. This might be one of the most important things along with forgiving your mistakes. Stop comparing your life to others because what they have going on, what their situation are, it's not yours. So hence you can't be them. You couldn't be them even if you wanted to. See how you can improve the quality of your own life. Forget about what could have been and think about how wonderful what you have right now. Again, this is why I don't like fake it till you make it and keeping up with the Joneses, because all they do to me is make people not value who they are in the moment and work towards being the better value version of themselves because they're too busy trying to be like Mike. And by the way, we still always looking for the next Michael Jordan, right? I always say everybody has their own legacy in space. So my question for you is, what's your legacy? What's your space? And why are you worried about somebody else's? It's not you. Here's one that's important too. Number 5, stay fit and healthy. I can't tell you how much better I feel about myself that I've been working out, better diet, I've lost weight, I feel healthier, I feel more vibrant. I just feel better. Let's be honest. When you can put on that pair of jeans, you buy that pair of shoes, and you just feel great about yourself. When we physically feel good on the outside, I'm going to tell you something. We feel that comes from the inside. Your inside and your outside, those perceptions of self, they're so intertwined. So let's be honest. If you're sick and not feeling good, people tend to know it from the outside. When you're happy, when you're feeling successful, you tend to emulate that. It shows on the outside. So we understand that they're tied to. So if you find that you become a slouch, you don't really dress up anymore, you're just not really doing your hair, whatever it is that you used to really do, ask yourself, why have I stopped doing these things? And at the core of it might be that you're not happy and some things in you have shifted, and maybe you've lost some of your confidence, which is different than self-esteem. Here's another one that's key as well. Don't aim for perfection. Perfection is subjective and hence almost impossible. What you may feel is perfect is maybe what I don't think is perfect. So there you go. Work towards being the best version of yourself based on what you think is appropriate. As long as you keep trying to be this perfect person, you're going to be stuck in a state of misery because it's impossible because it's subjective. Just be comfortable with you. I would tell you, if anything else about self-esteem, is learn to be in this moment and know what this moment means is key. So here would be my thing about final thoughts as we're winding down the show. There's no single sure shot solution to the problem in our minds about self-esteem, but there are things that we can do to push ourselves in the right direction. Self-concept, self-awareness, self-evaluation. Keep yourself in check emotionally. If something angers you, if something makes you anxious, notice it and figure out why. When something makes you happy, when something makes you feel just invincible, figure out why. If your focus is always shifting towards the negative, ask yourself why. Is it because the people around me, my environment, what's going on? Self-evaluation and self-awareness are so important. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Remember, you can always find episodes at mayakai.com. But of course, If you have a podcast preference of choice, you can find me on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and now on Amazon Audibles as well. Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Maya Akai. And of course, get social with me. You can always find me on Instagram at Maya_Akai and on Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. Like I said, everyone, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. And remember, until next time, and I always say this, it's so key. Remember, your present becomes your past, and your future is no more. So live every single day to the fullest, because you can't get it back. All right, everybody, until next time, be safe, be open, and be aware.
Get inspired, get motivated with Maya Akai and the Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find Maya on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai. On Facebook at Maya Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything Maya at MayaAkai.com.